Hi everyone, welcome to the channel After All That Years.
I keep thinking back to that evening, replaying it like a movie I can't turn off. 10 years of marriage, and I thought I was planning the perfect anniversary surprise. Instead, I walked into the worst night of my life. We'd always gone to Romano's for special occasions. It was a small Italian place downtown, nothing fancy, but it meant something to us. That's where I'd asked Nancy to marry me back in '98, nervous as hell with the ring burning a hole in my pocket. I'd called ahead, reserved the same corner table, even brought along a letter I'd been working on for weeks. Stupid me, I thought it would be romantic. Nancy had texted around 5 saying she'd be running late from the office. Her job at the advertising firm kept her busy, always some client crisis or last-minute presentation. I didn't think much of it. Hell, I was used to it by then. So I showed up early, ordered a beer, and waited. When she finally walked through that door, my stomach dropped. She wasn't alone. Some guy I'd never seen was right behind her, and the way he touched her arm as they walked in, that wasn't professional. That was personal. Real personal. I sat there like an idiot, watching them get seated 3 tables over, telling myself it had to be work-related, maybe a client dinner. But then I saw how they looked at each other, heard her laugh at whatever he was saying. That wasn't her work laugh. That was the laugh she used to save for me. The worst part was catching pieces of their conversation. She said something about feeling alive again for the first time in years, about how exciting it was to feel desired. Each word was like a punch to the gut, sitting there with that damn letter in my hands. Then she started talking about me. Called me a decent guy, but said the spark was gone, had been for a while. Said she couldn't remember the last time she felt anything real with me. I'd heard enough. I walked over to their table, my legs feeling like concrete. When Nancy saw me, her face went white as a sheet. I didn't say much, just put that letter down between them and told her it was what I'd written for our anniversary. Said she might as well read it with her friend. Then I walked out. The drive home was a blur. I kept circling the neighborhood, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. All those late nights at the office, the sudden interest in new clothes, the way she'd started guarding her phone. The signs had been there all along. I'd just been too trusting to see them. When I finally made it home, Nancy was already there, sitting on the couch still in that same dress. She looked scared, guilty. "We needed to talk," she said. "About what?" I asked her. "About watching you cozy up with another man on our anniversary?" She tried to explain, said it wasn't what I thought. But I cut her off. I'd seen enough, heard enough. "Just be honest with me for once," I told her. "How long has this been going on?" "A few months," she finally admitted. While I was planning our anniversary, writing that letter, she was with him. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. I asked her why. What had I done wrong? She gave me that line about it not being about me, about feeling stuck, about something being missing. Missing? I'd spent a decade trying to make her happy, building a life with her, and apparently that wasn't enough. I couldn't stay in that room with her anymore. Grabbed my jacket and left her there with her tears. Spent the night at a motel on the outskirts of town, one of those places that smells like disinfectant and broken dreams. But at least I could think clearly without her sitting there looking pitiful. The next morning, I knew I had to go back. This was my house too, my life too. I wasn't going to let her control what happened next. When I walked in, she was in the kitchen with coffee and red-rimmed eyes, looking like she hadn't slept. She apologized, said she never meant to hurt me. I almost laughed at that. "Congratulations," I told her. "You've done a hell of a job at exactly that." She wanted to know why him, of all people. Said he made her feel special, like she mattered. "And I don't make you feel that way?" I asked. 10 years of trying to make you happy? Was that not enough? She couldn't answer that. For the first time, I saw real regret in her eyes. But it was too little. Too late. Regret doesn't undo betrayal. Doesn't rebuild what's been destroyed. She asked what happened now. I told her I didn't know, but it wouldn't be the same. Couldn't be. Then I went upstairs, leaving her alone with the mess she'd made. The house felt different after that. Every room held memories that now felt tainted. The bedroom we'd shared, the kitchen where we'd had breakfast together for years, even the living room where we used to watch movies on Sunday afternoons. It all felt like evidence of a lie I'd been living. Nancy stayed downstairs most of the time, giving me space. The silence between us was suffocating, but neither of us knew how to break it. When hunger finally drove me to the kitchen that evening, she tried to get me to eat something. I wasn't interested in her concern. Not anymore. She said we were both falling apart. I told her to speak for herself. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with them. I went back upstairs before she could say anything else. The next morning, I found her at the dining table with a list of marriage counselors. She wanted to fix things, she said. For us. I almost couldn't believe the audacity. Now it was about us? When she was making her choices, it had been all about her. She insisted she didn't want to lose me, would do whatever it took. I asked if she thought a few therapy sessions would make everything normal again. She said no, but she didn't want to give up without trying. Her words sounded good, but they felt empty. Like she was more concerned about easing her guilt than actually saving our marriage. I told her I didn't know if there was an us left to save. She broke down at that, sobbing in a way I hadn't seen in years. It should have moved me, but I felt nothing. Just emptiness. I left her there and drove to a coffee shop across town. Somewhere neutral where I could think without her presence clouding everything. Sitting there, staring out at the street, I realized something. For 10 years, my whole world had revolved around making Nancy happy. And where had it gotten me? Betrayed, broken, alone. Maybe this wasn't just the end of my marriage. Maybe it was a chance to figure out who I was without her constant needs and demands. The thought scared me, but it also felt like the first honest thing I'd considered in months. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I found myself at an all-night diner, drinking bad coffee and thinking about all the warning signs I'd missed. Or maybe I hadn't missed them. Maybe I'd just chosen to ignore them because facing the truth was too painful. When I finally went home the next morning, Nancy was asleep on the couch, still in yesterday's clothes. She must have waited up for me. For a second, I felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the way she'd smiled at that man, the way she'd talked about me like I was just some obstacle in her path. She woke up when she heard me come in. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was hoarse from crying. I told her we could talk, but I wasn't interested in more lies or excuses. She wanted honesty? I'd give her honesty. I asked her how long it had been going on. She hesitated, then said a few months. The whole time I was planning our anniversary, pouring my heart into that letter, she was with him. The betrayal felt fresh all over again. "Why?" I asked. "What did I do wrong?" She gave me that same line about it being her fault, about feeling stuck. What was missing? I demanded. The life we'd built? The years we'd spent together? The future we'd planned? She couldn't answer, and her silence told me everything. I stood up, needing to move, needing air. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I told her I couldn't do this anymore, needed time to think. She begged me not to leave, to stay and work through it. But I couldn't. Not then. I walked out again, this time ending up at a motel on the other side of town. It was a dump, but it was away from her, away from the memories, away from the pain that seemed to live in every corner of our house. Lying on that uncomfortable bed, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, I realized I had no idea where I was going with any of this. My life had completely changed in one night, and I was still trying to catch up with the reality of it. I thought about calling someone, maybe my brother Larry or my old friend Pete. But what would I say? That my wife of 10 years had been cheating on me while I planned romantic anniversaries? That I'd been so blind I'd never seen it coming? The humiliation was almost worse than the betrayal. Sleep didn't come easy that night. When it finally did, I dreamed about Nancy and that man, laughing together while I sat alone at our anniversary table. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. The next morning, I knew I couldn't keep running away. This was my life, and I needed to face it head on. I checked out of the motel and drove home, steeling myself for whatever came next. Nancy's car was in the driveway, which meant she was still there. Part of me had hoped she might have left, made the decision for both of us. But no such luck. When I walked in, she was in the kitchen again, looking like she'd aged 10 years overnight. She seemed relieved to see me, like she'd been afraid I wouldn't come back. I might not have, I told myself, if I had anywhere else to go. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals over the years. Now it felt like a negotiating table between enemies. She started apologizing again, but I cut her off. I didn't want apologies. I wanted answers. Real ones, not the sanitized version she'd been feeding me. She admitted it had started as just talking. He was new at her office, charming, paid attention to her, made her feel attractive again. It escalated from there. Coffee dates became lunch dates, became hotel rooms. She said it like she'd had no control over it, like it had just happened to her. That's when I knew she still didn't get it. This wasn't something that had happened to her. These were choices she'd made, day after day, month after month. Each text message, each secret meeting, each lie she told me was a deliberate decision. I told her I was having trouble believing anything she said anymore. How could I trust someone who'd been living a double life for months? She cried, promised she'd never lie to me again, but the words felt meaningless. Trust isn't something you can just rebuild with promises. That afternoon, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Jake Morrison, a guy I knew who worked in computer forensics. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with, needed to see the full picture of Nancy's betrayal. It wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting myself and making informed decisions about my future. Jake was reluctant at first, but he owed me a favor from years back. He said he'd see what he could find, but it might take a few days. I told him I wasn't going anywhere. While I waited for his call, I tried to go through the motions of normal life. But everything felt different. Food had no taste. TV shows I used to enjoy seemed pointless. Even work felt like I was just going through the motions, waiting for my real life to resume. Nancy tried to bridge the gap between us, but every attempt felt forced. She'd ask how my day was, try to start conversations about mundane things, act like we were just going through a rough patch instead of dealing with the complete destruction of our marriage. I couldn't pretend anymore. When she asked what I wanted for dinner one night, I told her I didn't care. When she suggested we watch a movie together, I said I had other things to do. I wasn't trying to be cruel, but I couldn't fake normalcy when everything was broken. Jake's call came on a Thursday evening. I was in the garage, pretending to organize my tools, when my phone rang. His voice was grim when I answered. "I found what you were looking for," he said, "but you're not going to like it." The evidence was worse than I'd imagined. Months of text messages, photos she'd sent to this guy Eric, hotel receipts charged to our joint account. Jake had put together a timeline that showed the affair had been going on even longer than Nancy had admitted. While she'd been telling me about late meetings and weekend work sessions, she'd been with him. The hotel receipts were what really got to me. She'd used our money I'd earned working overtime and weekends, to fund her betrayal. It wasn't just emotional cheating or even physical cheating. It was financial betrayal too. When Jake finished telling me everything he'd found, I sat in that garage for another hour, trying to process it all. The woman I'd loved for 15 years, married for 10, had been systematically lying to me while planning a completely separate life. I went inside and found Nancy watching TV in the living room. When she saw my face, she knew something had changed. "We need to talk," I said, and she muted the television. I told her I knew everything. The real timeline, the hotel rooms, the fact that she'd used our joint account to pay for her affair. Her face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, fear, guilt, resignation. She tried to explain, said she'd been planning to pay the money back. I asked her with what. She didn't have an answer for that either. Was it worth it? I asked her. Was he worth destroying everything we built together? She couldn't look at me, just sat there crying, saying she didn't know what she'd been thinking. But that was the problem. She had been thinking. She'd made calculated decisions over and over again to betray me. I told her I was done. Done with the lies, done with the excuses, done with trying to salvage something that she'd already destroyed. I was going to see a lawyer in the morning. She begged me to reconsider, promised she'd do anything to fix things. But there was nothing left to fix. She'd seen to that. I slept in the guest room that night, and it was the best sleep I'd had in weeks. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was taking control of my life instead of just reacting to the chaos Nancy had created. The lawyer, Martin Webb, was straightforward about my options. The evidence Jake had gathered would help, especially the financial misconduct. Nancy using our joint funds for the affair was something the court would take seriously. "How long do you want to drag this out?" Martin asked. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to make Nancy suffer, wanted to expose every detail of her betrayal. But mostly, I just wanted it over. I wanted to move on with my life. As quickly as possible, I told him. When I got home that evening, Nancy was waiting in the living room. She looked like she'd been crying all day. "I know you went to see a lawyer," she said. I didn't deny it, asked her how she knew. "I called your office. They said you'd taken the afternoon off." She looked at me with those red-rimmed eyes. "Are you really going to throw away 10 years of marriage?" "I'm not throwing anything away," I told her. "You already did that." She tried one more time to convince me to give her a chance, to try counseling, to work through this together. But there was no together anymore. She'd made sure of that when she chose to build a secret life with another man. Over the next few days, Nancy became increasingly desperate. She'd leave little notes around the house, reminding me of good times we'd shared. She'd cook elaborate meals that I barely touched. She even bought a book about rebuilding trust after infidelity and left it on my nightstand. But it was too late for self-help books and romantic gestures. The damage was done, and no amount of effort on her part could undo the months of lies and betrayal. A week later, she surprised me by saying she was moving out temporarily, going to stay with her sister across town. She said she wanted to give me space to think, to figure out what I wanted. I watched her pack her suitcase, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I'd have the house to myself, that I wouldn't have to face her guilt and desperation every day. Sadness because this really was the end of everything we'd built together. After she left, I sat in the quiet house and let myself grieve. Not just for the betrayal, but for the loss of the future we'd planned. The trips we'd talked about taking, the retirement we'd looked forward to, the grandchildren we'd hoped to spoil someday. All of that was gone now, replaced by lawyers and custody arrangements and the awkward dance of dividing up a shared life. But as I sat there in that silence, I also felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. For the first time in months, I could breathe. I could think about what I wanted without worrying about Nancy's needs and feelings. I could imagine a future that was entirely my own. It wasn't the future I'd planned, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe I'd been so focused on making Nancy happy that I'd forgotten what made me happy. Maybe this was my chance to find out. The divorce papers were filed the following Monday. Nancy's lawyer tried to negotiate, suggesting mediation and settlement discussions. But I wasn't interested in dragging things out. Martin had structured everything fairly. Nancy would get her share of our assets, but she'd also be responsible for paying back the money she'd spent on her affair. When Nancy got the papers, she called me in tears, begged me to reconsider one more time. But I was done with her tears, done with her promises, done with the whole mess she'd created. "This is really it?" she asked. "This is really it," I confirmed. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of relief and sadness. I'd come home to an empty house and feel grateful for the silence, then remember all the good times we'd shared in those same rooms. It was like living in a time machine, where every corner held memories of who we used to be before everything fell apart. Nancy tried calling several more times, each conversation more desperate than the last. She'd found a new therapist, she said. She was willing to quit her job if that's what it took. She'd even suggested we move to a different city, start fresh somewhere else. But all her proposals had the same problem. They were built on the assumption that I still wanted to fix things. I didn't. The trust was gone, and without trust, what did we really have? Shared history, sure, a mortgage and joint bank accounts, but not love. Not the kind that survives betrayal anyway. My brother Larry came to visit during the worst of it. He'd gone through his own divorce 5 years earlier, so he understood what I was dealing with better than most. We sat in my living room drinking beer and talking about how marriages fall apart. "You know what the hardest part is?" he said. "It's not the anger or even the hurt. It's realizing that the person you thought you knew never really existed." He was right. The Nancy I'd loved, the one I'd planned to grow old with, wouldn't have been capable of what she'd done. But maybe that Nancy had been my imagination all along. Maybe I'd been so invested in the idea of our marriage that I'd stopped seeing who she really was. The legal process dragged on longer than I'd hoped. Nancy's lawyer kept pushing for reconciliation, trying to delay the proceedings. But Martin was good at his job, and he kept things moving forward. The financial audit was particularly brutal, going through years of bank statements, credit card bills, joint expenses. It was like performing an autopsy on our marriage, examining every financial decision we'd made as a couple. The hotel charges were the worst part. 3 different occasions over 4 months, always the same upscale place downtown. Each time she'd charged it to our joint account, then come home and acted like nothing had happened. I'd been funding my own betrayal without knowing it. During one of our final meetings with the lawyers, Nancy broke down completely. Started sobbing about how sorry she was, how she'd give anything to undo what she'd done. Her lawyer looked embarrassed, mine looked uncomfortable, and I just felt tired. Tired of her dramatics, tired of her guilt, tired of the whole mess. "I loved you," she said to me across that conference table. "I still love you." "No," I told her quietly. "You loved the security I provided. You loved having someone to take care of the bills and fix things around the house and listen to you complain about work. But you didn't love me. If you had, you wouldn't have been able to do what you did." She didn't have an answer for that. The house felt different after she moved out completely. At first, it was too quiet. I'd find myself listening for her footsteps upstairs or waiting for her key in the front door. But gradually, I started to appreciate the peace. No more walking on eggshells, wondering what mood she'd be in when she got home. No more scheduling my life around her unpredictable work demands. I started making changes, small ones at first. Rearranged the furniture in the living room, painted the kitchen a color I actually liked instead of the beige Nancy had insisted on. Bought groceries I wanted to eat instead of the organic health food she preferred. It sounds trivial, but each small choice felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. My friend Pete started inviting me to his weekly poker game. I'd always wanted to join, but Nancy had made comments about it being a waste of time and money. Now I went every Thursday night, and it felt great to laugh with other guys, to have conversations that didn't revolve around relationship drama. Work became a refuge too. I threw myself into projects I'd been putting off, stayed late when I wanted to, took on extra assignments. My boss noticed the change in my attitude and even mentioned the possibility of a promotion. Funny how much more energy you have when you're not constantly trying to manage someone else's emotions. The hardest part wasn't the big gestures or dramatic moments. It was the small, everyday reminders of our shared life. Finding her coffee mug in the back of the cabinet. Getting mail addressed to both of us. Running into mutual friends who didn't know we were getting divorced and asked how Nancy was doing. I developed a standard response. "She's fine, but we're going through some changes." Most people were tactful enough not to push for details, though I could see the curiosity in their eyes. Nancy's sister Claire called me once, about 3 months after Nancy moved out. She wanted to know if there was any chance of reconciliation. Nancy was devastated, she said. Barely eating, crying all the time, full of regret. She made her choices, I told Claire. Now she has to live with them. But don't you miss her? Don't you miss what you had together? I thought about that question for a long time after I hung up. Did I miss Nancy? I missed the idea of her, the version of her I thought I'd married. But the real Nancy, The one who could lie to my face for months while sleeping with another man? No, I didn't miss her at all. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning in March. I remember the date because it was exactly 8 months after our anniversary disaster. Martin called to tell me the judge had signed the papers, and just like that, 10 years of marriage were legally over. I expected to feel something dramatic, relief, sadness, anger. Instead, I just felt empty. Not in a bad way, but like I'd finally put down a heavy weight I'd been carrying for months. I was free to figure out who I was without Nancy's needs and demands shaping every decision. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since before I got married. I went to a movie by myself. Some action film Nancy would have hated. Bought popcorn and soda, sat in the back row, and enjoyed 2 hours of explosions and terrible dialogue. It was perfect. Nancy tried to contact me a few more times after the divorce was final. A text message on my birthday. A card at Christmas with a long handwritten note about how sorry she was and how much she regretted everything. I read them, but I didn't respond. What would have been the point? We had nothing left to say to each other. I heard through the grapevine that she and Eric had tried to make a real relationship work after she left me, but it fell apart within a couple of months. Apparently, the excitement of sneaking around and forbidden romance didn't translate well to mundane reality. They'd had nothing in common beyond the thrill of their secret affair. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated by that news, but mostly I just felt sorry for both of them. They'd blown up 2 marriages and hurt several people for something that wasn't even real. The whole thing was just sad and pointless. I started dating again about a year after the divorce. Nothing serious at first, just coffee dates and casual dinners. It felt strange being single again after 15 years with Nancy, but also liberating. I could be myself without worrying about whether I was meeting someone else's expectations. The women I met were different from Nancy in important ways. They had their own careers, their own interests, their own lives that didn't revolve around drama and neediness. They were capable of having conversations about something other than their problems or their feelings. It was refreshing. I dated a woman named Sharon for several months. She was a nurse, divorced herself, with 2 teenage kids. She was honest about her past, direct about what she wanted, and respectful of my boundaries. The relationship didn't work out long term. We were at different stages of life. But it showed me that there were trustworthy people out there. People who understood that relationships were built on honesty and mutual respect. The house gradually became mine again, instead of ours. I remodeled the master bedroom, tearing out the wallpaper Nancy had chosen and painting it a deep blue I'd always liked. I bought new furniture, hung different pictures, even got a dog. A golden retriever I named Rex. Nancy had always said she was allergic to dogs, though I suspect that was just another excuse to control our living situation. Rex and I developed a routine. Morning walks before work, longer hikes on weekends, evenings on the back porch where he'd chase squirrels while I read the paper. He was better company than Nancy had been in the last years of our marriage, and he never once lied to me or made me feel like I wasn't good enough. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Nancy had always found something wrong with my buddies. They were too loud, too crude, not sophisticated enough for her tastes. But now I could spend time with whoever I wanted, and I realized how much I'd missed having genuine friendships. My relationship with my family improved too. Nancy had always been critical of family gatherings, complained about my relatives, made excuses to skip holidays. Now I could enjoy Sunday dinners at my parents' house without worrying about her mood or her passive-aggressive comments afterward. 2 years post-divorce, I ran into Nancy at a grocery store. She looked older, tired, and she'd gained some weight. She seemed nervous when she saw me, like she wasn't sure how I'd react. We made polite small talk for a few minutes. She asked how I was doing, and I told her I was well. She mentioned she was working at a different company now, living in an apartment across town. "I think about you sometimes," she said as we were parting ways. "Wonder how things might have been different." "They could have been different," I told her. "But you chose a different path." She nodded sadly and pushed her cart away. I watched her go and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret. She was just someone I used to know, someone who'd played an important role in my life for a while but wasn't part of my story anymore. These days, I'm happier than I've been in years. My life is quieter than it used to be, but it's genuine. I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not, or walk on eggshells around anyone's moods. I make decisions based on what I want and need, not what someone else expects of me. I've learned that betrayal, while painful, can also be a gift. It strips away illusions and forces you to see clearly. Nancy's affair showed me that I'd been living a lie, trying to hold together a marriage that only existed in my imagination. Her betrayal freed me from that delusion and gave me the chance to build something real. I'm not bitter about what happened anymore. Nancy made choices that revealed her character, and those choices ultimately led to consequences she didn't anticipate. But those same choices also led me to a better life, one where I'm valued and respected by the people around me. The anniversary date doesn't bother me anymore. March 15th is just another day on the calendar now, not a reminder of loss and betrayal. If anything, it reminds me of how far I've come, how much stronger and wiser I've become since that terrible night at Romano's. I still go to that restaurant occasionally. The food is still good, and I refuse to let Nancy's choices rob me of a place I enjoyed long before I met her. Sometimes I'll sit at that same corner table and remember the man I was that night. Trusting, naive, desperate to save something that was already gone. I have compassion for that man, but I'm glad I'm not him anymore. The life I have now isn't the one I planned, but it's better in many ways. It's built on honesty instead of illusion, on self-respect instead of desperation to please someone else. It's a life where I can look in the mirror and be proud of the man staring back at me. And maybe, someday, I'll find someone who appreciates the man I've become. Someone who understands that real love isn't about passion and excitement, though those things are nice. Real love is about choosing each other every day, being honest even when it's difficult, and building something together that's stronger than either person could create alone. Until then, I'm content with the life I've built for myself. It took Nancy's betrayal to show me what I was truly capable of, and for that, strange as it sounds, I'm almost grateful. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. The night she walked into Romano's with Eric, I thought my world was ending. I was right, it was. But sometimes one world has to end before a better one can begin.